Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is Rob Willis. Rob is a communication skills trainer in scaling tech companies on a mission to stop meetings that could have been emails. His approach has been developed through delivering over 3,000 presentations to more than 100,000 people, as well as working with hundreds of participants at organizations like HelloFresh, Raising, and Bubble. So far, so normal for the type of guests I have in here, but there's more to Rob than meets the eye. His original career plan was to become a music producer, which got him to spend a month living in a penthouse in LA with a German rapper, made him part of an electropop boy band, and during that whole time, he was working as a tourism guide to pay the bills. After all of that, is coming on this show a high or a low point in his professional life? I guess we're about to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, Rob Willis. Rob, welcome to the show.
Hi, Francisco. And I see this as the climax of everything I've been working towards, the pinnacle.
Yes. Let's start with those lofty expectations that cannot set us up for failure in any way, shape, or form.
Indeed not.
Okay, so should we start by doing something that I think you like a lot, which is this style of communications trainer, storytelling coach, destroy the tech industry. Should we use the power of our arguments to silence some people about all the wrong things that they're doing?
I think that sounds like a wonderful idea, Francisco.
Okay, so you do a lot of work with startups, particularly in the tech sector. So what are the typical communication problems that you encounter when you're working with there? And I'm particularly interested in the ones that you think can be solved by something like storytelling.
Okay. I think the root problem, because the kind of companies that I'm working with, they're generally beyond the startup phase, so they're already a few hundred people, they're growing, and people become really specialized. And I always think about this, like you can't really compare a data analyst to a influencer marketer. And these people are very different kinds of people, they speak in very different kinds of ways, yet they need to work together, they need to align, they need to do things. And when they go into giving a presentation, into a meeting or anything like that, I always find that they struggle to adapt the way that they communicate to each other. And they end up speaking in their own jargons. One will be highly technical, one will be more a kind of marketing way. And that means that it's really, really hard to understand each other. That leads to loads of clarifying questions. Usually nothing happens apart from just booking another meeting. So everyone's completely overwhelmed with meetings and clarifying questions. However, if they just used a story or an example, whichever word you want to use for it, could have cleared up all of that doubt really in one go. I mean, that's certainly one thing that I found storytelling is really good for, is just being able to put everyone on the same page when it comes to talking about a particular issue.
So I'm not sure if it's assertion is the right word, but it might be, about the communication problems are, I mean, it sounds very similar to the communication problems that we see in pretty much any corporation, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if the tech, I can imagine, because I don't have a ton of experience working with the tech industry, so I can imagine the tech industry gives itself more to jargon than perhaps some other industries, but is it particularly worse, or is it maybe that the type of people that work in tech are already starting, they're behind when it comes to their communication skills?
It depends who you're talking about in the tech industry. But one thing I think which makes it a bigger problem for them is, by the nature of tech, they need to move a lot faster and they need to get things done a lot quicker. because the whole industry just moves so quickly, and most of the niches that these companies operate in are really winner takes all. So they need to be ahead of everyone else, and they need to make decisions quicker than everyone else. You're quite right, though. I think all companies struggle with this jargon, which is particular to whatever industry that they're in. And tech has very particular bits of jargon, of course. But I think that the reason that it's so important to bring these communication skills into these companies is simply that they need to move really quickly without spending a million hours on extra meetings and clarifying questions and so on.
Now, I think we've talked about, I have talked about this for sure. I've seen you've talked about this in your content, but there is always this objection from pretty much everyone, but I think in the corporate world, this is more common than in other parts of the professional world, against not just better language and clearer language, but storytelling in particular. So it's kind of this weird paradox where at the same time it's a buzzword and it's something that's kind of hot, but it still gets horrendous resistance inside most organizations. Now, in theory, people in the tech world are younger, they are hip with some stuff that old folk like we are not, or should be less so. So do you find that when it's a tech organization, particularly one that is fairly young, are they any less resistant to storytelling than the usual people we come across in the business world?
I think everyone is resistant to storytelling, and I think kind of for the same reasons. I don't think generation has much to do with it, because of the cultural expectations around how we should be communicating at work. And you're quite right, it's a buzzword, it's hot, and I get people saying, yeah, we need to do workshops on storytelling. Storytelling is really important. But then you try and get someone in the company, it's like, have you told a story? Like, no. My boss just wants the facts. Or our product is highly technical. Or, oh, our customers don't have time to listen to stories. Because we think of storytelling as a form of entertainment, like a nice to have. And I think somehow different to truth. Like we've got facts and we've got truth, like facts and truth on one side, and storytelling is somehow different to it. And in a way, that's right. There is raw data, and then there is a story which you create, you find in that data as well. You have to come up with some kind of opinion about what the story is, which is going on in that way. And that means you need to let go of a mathematician would hate this, but some of the intricacies and complications and things that will let go. You need to find the predominant story so you can actually get stuff done. So yeah, my message to all of those people who say, oh, my boss just wants the facts. Yeah, they might say that they just want the facts because they might like to feel that they are a machine that can make 100% logical decisions. In all actual fact, what they need is a story. They need a narrative that will help them reach some sort of decision. And it is your job to find that.
I think of a similar situation that I don't know if every person has in their home, but I believe I do, which is that my wife tells me she wants me to do certain things around the house. She wants me to be tidy. She wants to not, leave all my cupboard in a looking like a war zone. She says stuff like this all the time. But I know that if I do all of those things, then I'm taking away the moral superiority that she feels she has over me, and that would inevitably alter the balance of our relationship. So really what I'm doing is giving her what she wants, not what she thinks she wants. And I mean, that's almost exactly the same thing you said, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's very selfless of you, Francisco, to do that.
That's
yeah, people People want the revolution, they just don't know it yet.
Selfless. That's very few words describe me any better than selfless. But this is this is an interesting point, right? And this is something that I need to start making both myself and I need to start telling people both, in the podcast and in every other opportunity I have, that people that work with presentation skills and communication, storytelling, and all of that, I think we have a mission in the world. I mean, we have many missions, but this is one for sure. Is every time we go into a company that we hear someone say something like, well, my boss just wants the facts and whatever, we need to make an effort to get that boss in the room and say, listen, Joanne, your team believes that they are forbidden from finding a more engaging way to present anything that might take 30 seconds longer because you will not stand for it. You want the facts and nothing but the facts, even if they're boring. Can we confirm that that's the case or not? And I think most bosses would probably say, no, I've just paid you to come here teach these people how to do presentations. I've just paid you to come and deliver a workshop in storytelling. If all I wanted were the facts, why am I wasting my money with you? So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And I don't even think it's just about being engaging. I think it is about people having the courage to give an opinion. When you work in a company and your job is not just to curate data and then deliver it to someone else to work out what it means. Your job is to find what is going on and offer a recommendation. And I think that people are very reluctant to give, and I'm using the word story, maybe not in the way that everyone thinks about it, but the narrative. People refrain from doing it because they feel intimidated, because it means that they have to stand for something and they might be wrong about it. So rather than actually give, like, this is what I think is going on, this is what I think should happen next, they'll start with a very small, detailed bit of data. I mean, pretty much every client has come to me and said, this is the problem. Go into a meeting, people start on a very tiny bit of data that no one has any context for, no one knows really what it means. They present it, it sounds interesting. At the end of the meeting, they say, cool, interesting. And then they go on to something else and nothing has happened because of it. Whereas what they needed people to do was to say, this is what I think is going on. This is what we need to do next. It's a lot more risk, but it's actually what you're being paid to do in these companies, is have an opinion.
Yes, I think that I've expressed this opinion before, and I know of some people who listen to this and think not only that I'm crazy, but also that I'm a dangerous lunatic. But I believe that if you only have the data and you don't have a story that goes with it, and by story, I just mean a real life example, that makes a point, then you don't know as much, either you don't know as much about that subject as you think you do, or you don't know enough in a way that you can make it relevant for people that are outside of your technical sphere, which are often the people that you're presenting to. Or, and this is the least generous explanation, you just don't care about the people affected by the problem that you're describing. Because we think that, like, you explain something in theoretical terms, which is what you're doing when you're talking about data. But if you cannot give an example of how that affects a real human being, then either you only have half the understanding, or you're working on the basis that everybody can make that connection, which is not always the case. And that's the main reason, why when we explain something, people don't get it and they say, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I really get it. Can you give me an example? The example is the distillation of what you're trying to say. And that doesn't mean that the one example informs everything you're doing, but the example is how you sell it or how you explain it. And that's, I think that's the part that people don't usually get. They think that the example or the story is one data point, and you don't do anything with one data point, but you do. You explain the data with one data point. That is representative of the rest.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. You made me think of a quote by Hans Rosling, who said that the world cannot be understood without statistics, but it cannot be understood also with only statistics. And you need to unpick those little stories, those things that come out in order to make things meaningful. In any kind of, I think, presentation or piece of communication, you've got an overarching narrative, and then you need to bring those individual data points, the stories, in them to life, because almost every bit of data pretty much represents something that humans have interacted with at some level. It doesn't matter if it's like app load times, that's going to affect a person in a particular moment. And when we lose sight of that and turn it into merely statistics, then you're quite right. People are unable to draw the connection between why this data point and why it's meaningful and why they actually need to do something about it. And the challenge in tech in particular is trying to make data points meaningful when you've got two distinct groups of people, what we can call technical people and business people. Those two people need to see what's meaningful in each other's points, and stories are really the best way to bring that across, I find.
So let's put aside the ideal world of thinking, where is our stories useful in the tech, in a tech company? Wow, they're useful everywhere. You can use them in most places. Okay, I don't even want to go into the argument of that there are some times where they're just not what you should be doing, but I wanted to understand from your experience, where have you found, not that they're useful, because they could be useful pretty much by most moments of communication, but where have you found that intersection between they're useful here and you can actually teach people to use them here? Because there are some things that with storytelling, like with many things, I could do it, or you could do it in many moments, but your average person that's working in the company, even if they really want to learn, that's not realistic to expect that they're going to be telling stories all the time. So where is that intersection in the tech companies that you've worked in?
Yeah, I guess this is going to relate this to our favorite person to dispute, Donald Miller, and his building a story brand. And when you're talking to someone, you are not the hero, you are the guide. And a guide needs to show empathy and authority. And I think storytelling is most important when you're trying to show empathy and authority to the people who you're talking to. So empathy, what I mean by that is when you're going into a presentation, you're talking about, I've got this strategy, it's going to solve your problem. You need to show that you've understood their problem. So it might be, hey, we've got a new dashboard or something which is going to automate a lot of the work. And you say, look, I understand that at the moment, everything is being automated. Me and my team, my team and I, we spent 2 weeks just trying to enter some data into this one particular dashboard. And that meant that we weren't able to do the kind of strategic work that I know is really important to you. So very quick little anecdote, which puts you on the same page, says that this is something which you can relate to, you understand. So build that connection with them. I think Sean Callahan calls them connection stories. That is really, really powerful. And the other is authority, when you want to show that you have done something like this before. Because one of the best kinds of credibility I think you can show is that you have solved this problem in the past 2 years. I always say the past 2 years because in tech, like if you say 15 years ago, then it's irrelevant nowadays. But I have solved this problem in the past 2 years. This is what the problem was. This is what we did. And this is how it turned out. I think this is relevant to what we're going through. So this is why I'm pitching it to you. So if you can find stories or examples which shows how you can connect to your audience, which may be business related, may be personal, but just at least to show that connection in this particular moment, or stories which can show that you have solved this problem at some point in the past. I think that will make any measure, any project, any strategy you're trying to implement a lot easier to get across.
I think it's worth mentioning to anyone who's listening to this and wondering why the hell we would possibly say anything negative about Donald Miller and StoryBrand. Our gripe with Don, I think our gripe with Don is the same. Is not at all to do with his system, which I think is incredibly effective for businesses to clarify what is it that they're trying to do in the world. And it's actually very effective for things like creating landing pages, or creating a website. I don't think mine is currently still following that model, but the first website I ever built as a speaker, I used their sort of model for a website. Where storytelling people tend to have a bit of a problem with building a story brand is that it's, well, not only it's not a book about storytelling at all, but also doesn't tell any stories. It's like a book about the power of stories. There's barely any stories in it. But again, it's not, in a way, he used the story structure to do something that has nothing to do with storytelling. And if you want to learn about real storytelling that has nothing to do with websites, then, or maybe even books, then building a story brand is not the book for you. And some people get that slightly confused.
Yeah, I'm still kind of disagreeing with you, because, and what this made me think of was another episode of your podcast. I forget who it was, but they drew the distinction between a story and a narrative. I really like this distinction.
Yes, I think it was with Andrés Oliveros, Mexican guy. Yeah,
it could be. And they said that the narrative, it uses the story structure, but there's no beginning and end. And what we often need to do is we need to find a narrative in what we're saying. Like, either this has been happening and I think we should do this, or this is our situation and this is the project that I recommend. The narrative, that's what you need to find. But you can bring parts of that narrative alive by telling stories. I am in full agreement that Donald Miller could have made his book even more readable had he been able to introduce some stories about how a particular client or a particular person, or even he himself, had been able to use one of these elements, the 7 steps or whatever it is, in his own work to bring about a particular result. It would have been more effective that way. Totally with you on that. But I don't think it's only for landing pages. I think you can construct most forms of communication thinking in this way, that they are the hero, I am the guide. It is up to me to show empathy and authority for them.
Yes, I think the book's done well enough. We don't need it to do any better.
He doesn't care what I think.
I don't want to make this whole thing about StoryBrand. I think it's where it has lots of uses. But where I think it's become problematic for some people is that either they confuse what it's for. So you can do a great post with that structure. It's a good story structure to structure things that are not a story, unless you're writing fiction. That's essentially what it is. It's the same problem of the hero's journey. The hero's journey is amazing, but it explains stories. It's not, and it's a model for writing stories from scratch. It's not a model for picking a real thing that happened to you and trying to fit into those things, because then you become a fiction writer and not what most people should be doing with storytelling. And I think it was Michael Margolis who you were talking about, who is the guy who I had on my episode number 101. And he's someone who's worked a ton with tech companies, Facebook and Google and all these people, and he works on narrative way more than he does with stories.
Yeah. I totally agree. These story elements will bring things to life, but you've got to have a narrative. I think you need both, really. You need both a story, an overarching narrative with stories that will bring that to life as well.
So, I have something on my list of stuff to cover, which is me having a go at you. But before I have a go at you, I want to talk about.
Let's hear it.
So you had this really funny video about how it was kind of like a game show, and it was about tech leaders, and they had to describe their purpose without using the sentence "save the world" or "saving the world," and
yeah, changing the world. Yeah.
So that's something that I've found that when it comes to values, when it comes to purpose, stories can be really powerful. Now, I think you're absolutely right. Tech companies have this. I don't know if you can call it a problem, but they do tend to think that what they're doing is gonna disrupt the world and save it somehow. So once you get them out of that narrative, what is the narrative that you need to get them into?
Well, I don't generally work with writing company missions or anything like that. However, I do come across all of these companies, and they're doing things which, if you were to describe it in 2 sentences, sound relatively mundane, yet there's this whole mission behind it. And that can be a little bit, when it verges into cliche, it can be ridiculed very easily. And there are loads and loads of comedy sketches beyond just mine about just that. But really, the story that they need to be telling to customers is perhaps more mundane. It's this is how we came across a problem and why we created what we do. I guess you could call it an origin story. Or these are the stories of the people who we've helped, testimonials, people who were unable to cook a healthy meal at home, so we were able to deliver a balanced ingredient list which helped them sit with their family at home, enjoy a moment together. So I think these are the stories which speak to me more than, hey man, with our mustache drawing app, we're going to change the world and disrupt it. But maybe that also is a result, these large convoluted stories, maybe they're also a result of the kind of environment that they have to work in. Many of these companies are funded pretty much entirely by VCs, venture capitalists, who expect a 100x return on their investment. And anything less than that doesn't really interest them, because it's just simply not enough to make up for the rest of their portfolio. So you need to come to them saying, this is the app which is going to change the world. This is what we can offer to 100x the money that you're going to put into this. So maybe it's not just them. Maybe it's partly a result of the culture which they're working in too.
Or it's the story they sold themselves, because they bought into the narrative of this is what a tech company is supposed to do, or this is what a founder is supposed to do, and the idea that you will make a ton of money and just offer marginal but important and profitable improvements to some industry that you don't necessarily see as impactful in the world is difficult to stomach as the thing that drives you to work every day. Maybe.
Yeah. There's definitely a bit of a messiah complex with some CEOs, but I'm not sure how convincing that is to a lot of the staff who they employ. Maybe that also changes, though. The story of the few people in the startup in a garage in just outside San Francisco. They're going on a journey together, which is going to change the world. That story changes a lot when you then get into an office with multiple locations, with specialized workforce who expect some kind of salary, at the end of the day, and expect to be able to make an honest living and bring their expertise. You have to have a different story probably about your company at different stages. It's a natural. The story at the beginning won't work when you get to another level.
I think there are 2 different problems there. I think one, you're completely right. The story from the beginning is not going to work later. Actually, in my podcast with Michael Margolis, we covered that exact thing. I think I even posted something about it, which was what got you here is not going to get you further. So you have, at some point, you have to change the story. But sometimes I think that the Messiah complex, or the looking for something bigger, to my mind, the issue there is that founder has disconnected himself or herself from the original pain that got them into the business in the first place, because almost certainly they saw a problem in the world or in their own lives, and that problem was causing real pain to someone, and they thought, hopefully, well, that sucks, we wouldn't want this person or people like this person to suffer, and I think I can make that better. And that pain will be relatable to other people if it's well explained, probably through the story. If you don't have that, what you have is the thing you're doing, and the thing you're doing might be, I don't know, some easier way to code. It might be a cheaper way to use some type of enterprise service that most people don't even know exists, and that is really, really boring, and that is not relatable. But then that's the mistake, is you're thinking about the thing and not how the thing makes people feel. The feeling part is where the focus needs to be. So
the feeling part, but specifically feeling of the people who you are helping. Maybe it's also a result of success. People make it, or leaders can make this all about themselves. I saw the same thing in the music industry. People would get a lucky break, they'd suddenly have a top 10 hits, they'd be hot, everyone would be talking about them. And suddenly it kind of, the story they told themselves, that this was something that they had always planned. And whoever you spoke to in their team, it might be the artist, it might be their manager, they're all saying, oh, I completely planned to create this persona that would resonate with the people. Or I'm the manager who took on this artist and made them who they are. Really like losing focus on all of the other things that made this work, which in the end was that they said something which resonated with a group of people, or at a particular time that it would work. So it takes a lot of humility, I think, to, after getting success, and it must be incredibly exhilarating being given hundreds of millions of dollars and then generating a company which is worth billions. It must be really hard to maintain that humility, but to not make it about yourself, but instead keep that focus on the people who you're helping, solving the problem that you originally found in the world. And also being grateful to everyone who helped you get there along the way, because these companies change a lot, not just in the story they tell themselves, but also not what they offer and who they help and so on, as new people come in and they bring bits of expertise too.
It's difficult for most people, I guess, to understand that you can take credit for being prepared enough so that when you got lucky, you could do something with that luck. And I think that's the part that a lot of people don't necessarily realize. Like, for example, take something like what I do, right? So I speak, I do some other stuff, but let's say the speaking. Now, I haven't gotten a gig that I could consider as this huge break, right? I spoke somewhere, and then from that gig, I've spent, years getting business out of that and built a whole successful career on the back of that. Now, that might or might not happen. Not all careers develop exactly that way, but let's say it does happen. There's no need for me to pretend that having gotten that particular gig, or having gotten one or two very important people in the audience for that gig, is not luck. Because it is. How you get gigs it's very random at times. Sometimes somebody saw a post that they might not have seen otherwise. There was for some reason they looked at an email that was kind of a sales email trying to get you in front of an organizer, and that day they were in a good mood and they read the email, where normally they would have just ignored that type of thing. Now, you still need to go up there and take advantage of the opportunity. And you could say, I prepared for years and I worked really hard so that when the break came out of luck, I could use it. But I think a lot of people just want to pretend everything is destiny. And it's, they have more agency than they do.
We forget, don't we? No, we forget. I mean, I remember the first workshop when I was really, wow, I've got my first big company paid gig, was completely by random. I don't think you can even do this nowadays. Sent out 1,000 LinkedIn messages to whatever particular position in these companies, not even really understanding what all the positions were, and said, I offer these kinds of training. And I just so happened that one of those messages was to the right person who happened to be looking for what I was offering on that particular day. So the stars came into line. It was complete luck, but I still needed to be able to capitalize upon it and actually deliver a training which they enjoyed. Thankfully, they did. I did a lot more business with them after that as well. But I cannot pretend that it was all planned like that. Though it might be, my ego might say, oh yeah, I did everything right. And that's why I was able to break into the business. Really, luck helped a huge amount with it.
Okay, so one last thing I wanted to ask with regards to the tech industry or other companies that you've worked in that are slightly more technical than other companies, is to do with when it comes to presentations and what nowadays has become very popularly called data storytelling, even though more often than not there's no storytelling involved. How do you find that in an industry where it's expected that there's likely to be more technical information being shown, or the expectation is that there's more technical information that needs to be shown in a presentation, how open are people to using fewer slides and simpler slides and telling some stories or doing any other type of presentation that is not just drowning people in data?
Yeah, I think one quote I once got from a participant was why have you included? I said, why have you included this particular data set? And it was pages and pages of stuff. And they said to me, oh, I just want to show I did my homework, which I think is the reason that a lot of people show all of this stuff, is they want to say, well, look how much information I have. What I say must be true. Therefore, you've got to listen to me. They think that the quantity of information is where their legitimacy comes from. And indeed, they would have needed to have looked at all of that stuff to understand what they want to say. But by the time you're presenting to someone, your job is not to try and understand. Your job is to communicate it. So the main message I have for all of those people who think that it's okay just to deliver essentially the graph that they use to understand something is the graph, the data that you use to understand it is not the same as you use to communicate it. When you're already at a moment of communication, you need to make it as easy as possible for someone to understand why you think what you do, so they can then make some sort of decision. If they have to trawl through pages and pages of data, then you're wasting their time. And you can keep that data, put it in an appendix or something. So if they say, oh, I want to look a bit deeper, go for it, knock yourself out. But in the moment that you are presenting, you need to be able to get the point across in a matter of seconds. The point of data storytelling really is to make it more efficient for someone to understand the data than they would otherwise. And the point of a graph is to make it more efficient for them to understand than if you just told them just by speaking. Yeah? And people lose sight of that, I think, sometimes.
I think people don't understand what a presentation is for, because there is this impression that the presentation is to inform, and sometimes it might be. I think some companies are very presentation heavy, and that's a different problem. They're having people deliver certain information in the form of a presentation that perhaps didn't need to be in the form of a presentation. Perhaps there were simpler ways to just have an email, to just have something else where you give people that information. A presentation should really be about insight or influence. Right? And probably those two things combined, right? The data you have is
Mm.
only valid insofar as it provides insight. If it's giving everybody the information they already have or they should have, then what's the point of, oh, we've accumulated all this data and we know nothing different than we knew before? Well, then there's no point,
Exactly.
right? So what is the insight you got out of that? And now that we
Yeah.
have this insight, what do we do with it? And people focus on this is all the data we got to learn this thing, and sometimes don't even tell you what the thing is, or let the thing be drowned in other stuff, or do half of the job. They tell you what the thing is, but do a very poor job of telling you what to do with the thing, assuming that's their job, because sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just the insight.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of there's a quote by a guy called Mike Hayes, who was a Navy SEAL, and now he teaches crisis communication. And he says that all communication that isn't actionable is just noise, because we are drowning in communication. We are drowning in meetings. We are drowning in emails, Slack messages, and everything. If you can't do anything with that information, it is literally just noise. And if you don't trust your team enough that they've done their homework, that they can stand by things with data, then you've got another problem as well. So you need to be able to deliver insights quickly. You should be speaking to persuade, not to inform. And persuasion, you can either take that as being like, do this thing right now. I think this is what we need to do. Or this is what I believe to be the reason for this thing happening. Let's say you're giving a quarterly report on what's happened. You need to be able to eke out what is the narrative, what happened significantly in that time, what can we take away from it. But it's all about persuading people to think in a particular way or take a particular perspective on something, I think.
You, like me, have a small young kids, right? And how old are yours? Is yours again?
Okay. She's 3.
So I've got a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and this is something, again, this applies to all.
Is it called Olivia? No. You called Olivia.
One, the youngest one, yes, as well. So my oldest is.
Yeah, my 3-year-old called Olivia.
My oldest is called Alice or Alice, and my youngest is called Olivia. And as soon as my dickheads of friends here in Barcelona heard the name of the second one, they immediately realized that their initials make Oli, which is the garlic mayo dip that everybody's obsessed with in Catalonia. So the Aioli sisters. But anyway, so we have small children, and one thing that I see in my house all the time is that we have a tendency to think that we can just talk people out of their problems or of the things that they're doing that we don't think are quite ideal. And you don't do this with a 1-year-old because you know it would be ridiculous. You probably don't do it with a 2-year-old, but they get to a certain point in their language development that you generally think, or at least one of the couple tends to think, that you can just talk to them about things. And it often just doesn't work. And as verbose as I am, I'm not the one who does that often in my house. And I see this all the time where Olivia will be acting up about getting dressed, for example, and my wife would beg and plead and boss her. None of that works. And then I come in and I start talking about something else, and then I bring it round to some fun thing, and before you know it, she's getting dressed. And I sometimes talk to my wife about, like, is it okay that we are doing this through distraction? Is it okay that we're doing this through fun? Shouldn't we just do it the way it's supposed to be done? And she needs to understand. I'm like, yes, in theory, it's great if we can reason with her. But, been married before, I've learned that reason alone doesn't really necessarily change anybody's mind. So it's the same with people in any walk of life. You can't just reason with people about the things they need to know. You can't just tell them what they need to know. You need better communication than that, sometimes, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And it will be a moment, I'm thinking in like more of a business context, that you'll go into a meeting with someone who doesn't like your idea. They've heard about it and they don't like it yet. And you can give them all the reasons in the world. You can give them all the data. And all they'll say is, oh, how did you collect it? How do you know that's true? What's the significance of that? I see it another way. You cannot overcome it with data. You need to come up with a way of connecting with them emotionally that will make them question their perspective. And storytelling is the most effective way of doing that. When it comes to getting my daughter dressed in the morning, I'm not sure. I don't know how. I feel you've got greater wisdom in that area than I do. But yeah, you're quite right. It's really frustrating, but you want to say like, oh, come on, we're really late. I've got this other important meeting I've got to get to. And you're hoping that she'll say, oh, sorry about that, Father. Of course. Let me get ready right now. But that hasn't happened
with that
as
accent.
yet.
Exactly. Yes. I like her to become British.
With that,
to become British when I tell her what to do. Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. All children speak with precisely that British accent, in my experience. Anyway.
There is, I'm going to digress slightly, but I had Stuart Goldsmith on the podcast a few months back, and he's a British comedian. And when he went to, I think he did the opening bit in Conan O'Brien, and he had the thing about how when he has to pay for the babysitter, he becomes a British lord for some reason and starts getting like over here are your earnings. I obviously can't do the accent, but yes. Yeah, he starts talking in a really super formal way. But to the point we were discussing, it's an interesting paradox how one of the very first things that everybody will say when you talk about storytelling and how people should use it more in business is how, well, one story is not data. One story is just one data point. It doesn't mean anything. But the reality is that I don't know if it was always this way, but right now, people's belief in facts or whatever we are telling them are the facts or the truth are not very high. So they will challenge your facts, they will challenge your data. So the thing that was meant to be the end of the argument is not. It becomes the beginning of a completely different argument that is not the one you're trying to have. So you need to sneak the information in some way. You need a Trojan horse that storytelling is. And once you've got their attention, once they've said, okay, I hear you, I believe that that was true in this case, but what does the data say? And at that point, you might get more of an opening for actually sharing the data that substantiates the thing you're trying to say. If you just go in with what you're telling them is the truth, they will push back, which is I think very paradoxical given what data is supposed to be and what stories are supposed to be.
Yeah, I think it's the thing is there is a truth, but it's way too complex for anyone to understand. And maybe the challenge, I think, comes with the diametrical ways that science and storytelling communicate. Science is more, I have a theory and I will try and disprove it, or I will try and prove it, by trying different things. Storytelling is more, this is the example from which I will draw truth. So you start with the example. And that's, I think, maybe where people have this misconception about storytelling and why they find it to be more a form of entertainment or not truth. But the fact is that there is no possible way that you can convey all the complexities in the world. And unless we just want to remain paralyzed by academic study, then we need to come up with an opinion at some point. So we need to create that narrative. Like businesses need to get something done. Otherwise, they'd never release anything. They'd never ship anything. So we need to create a story at some point. And I don't know whether it's a Trojan horse. I think it is merely giving a limited snapshot of reality, of what's going on, and interpreting it in a particular way. Because I don't see it as misleading. I simply view it as an interpretation.
Well, I don't mean that it's misleading. I don't call it a Trojan horse because it's misleading. I call it a Trojan horse because the meaning you're trying to impart will come in with the story without necessarily being announced beforehand. So you're listening to it because it's a story, because it's engaging, because maybe it's entertaining, and whether you want to or not, you get to a conclusion about what the story means once you've heard it, assuming it's a story well chosen or well told. And it doesn't matter if you want to agree with my point or not. If I tell you a story and the point is very clear, unless you believe I'm a liar, you will come to that conclusion. Whereas if I just told you the conclusion and said, let me prove it to you now, it's a different case. Because now you're waiting now you're going to listen to the story the same way you'd listen to data. You're trying to find problems with it. But if you just tell the story, the point comes along, whether you like it or not. And that's what I mean by being a Trojan horse.
No, for sure. You can't argue with a story. You can only engage with it, really.
Well, you can. I think you can argue with the significance of the story, but then this is where the smart business communicator or communicator in general comes in, which is the story is not the starting point of your argument. It's the what you call it? It's the arrowhead. Right? So the story is just the thing you're using to get it across. You have a theory. That theory probably, we would hope, came out of observation, backed up by data, investigated. And once you've done all of those things, you just have to deliver that payload.
Yeah.
And the story is the thing that delivers it. The story is not where, this thing happened. Let me create a whole theory based on this and then cherry pick some data to back it up, which unfortunately is what some people do, but that's not, I believe, what either of us are advocating, unless it's in our personal or romantic lives, in which case, whatever gets the job done.
In which case... Exactly. Yeah, you remember when...
Yes.
No, you're completely right. It's the... you need to be able to get attention at the beginning of a presentation. You need to explain why you feel something is significant. Take advantage of the fact people are at their most attentive at the beginning. And then you begin to back it up with, like, this is the theory. These are the points that I feel. This is the strategy we're going to adopt. So it is an excellent way into talking about a particular topic, for sure.
Right. So I said in the beginning that I was going to give you a hard time. We got distracted and I haven't. So
go for it, man.
This is about something slightly more practical than some of the things we've been talking about, which is we talked a lot about stories, particularly in more your world than mine. And there was a video you put out before about where to find stories, because you had this contention that you don't want to tell the same stories that everybody has ever heard, which I agree with. I don't necessarily agree that a book that says, 101 business stories to dazzle your audience would be a bad idea. I think I'll be very surprised if anyone has heard more than, a handful of those business stories. But you had, I think it was 5 different tips, and I think they needed some, not necessarily disagreement, but further exploration or explanation. The first one was go where the stories are happening, which I think I know what you mean, but what did you really mean with go where the stories are happening?
Okay. If you want to talk about how a customer, for instance, is being affected by a particular issue, then rather than just looking at the data, which is part of it too, it's important that you also talk to people and their experiences about how they are interacting with this particular issue, and find questions that will help them talk about why this is meaningful to them, why it's important, and so on. If you want to think about, okay, we're restructuring how our engineering team is put together, and we feel that this is a reason for it. You need to go and you need to talk to those people. What I meant by that is that people need to experience it some way. Like standing back and thinking about things theoretically only really gets you so far. You need to go in and actually see it for yourself, or at least talk to people who have seen it for themselves. I mean, if you're talking about a charity or something which is helping a particular group of people in a particular part of the world, if there was no stories or images of people in that particular part of the world, it wouldn't be particularly effective in getting the importance of that cause across. So you do need to have that element, I think, to find stories that are going to be useful.
Yeah, I think I don't disagree with that argument at all, or that suggestion at all. I think that suggestion just suffers from a problem that I've talked about many times, you've talked about many times, which is that people have a misunderstanding about what a story is. So my concern is always that when we tell people something that sounds sensible, but it involves them knowing what a story is, that often leaves them like, okay, great, but then they get to where they are, but they don't know what they're looking for. So to me, that is not go where the stories are happening, but do you want to talk about a problem? Go where that problem is happening, and talk to the people there or whatever. Watch that problem happen. Do you want to talk about a solution? Where is that solution being used? Go there and collect experiences from there. So I think it was just the story part of it where I could definitely see people go where the stories are happening. So I think it required further explanation, which is, to be honest, that is the same gripe I had with that video about all the other points, which are all good points. So I think the second point was, the second point I had a gripe with, because you said if something was important enough to take a photo of, it probably has a story behind it. Really? I don't know. I don't know what
about
photos you are taking. I think maybe you should spend less time on LinkedIn and more on Instagram, and you notice that maybe you have too lofty a view of human beings to think that just because we're taking a photo, it probably is important enough to have a story behind it.
But I think that the point is more, when you see a photo of something, it reminds you of being in that moment. And then often stories or examples will come out of that. Of course, I do look through my photo album and I find where my daughter has got hold of my phone and there's like 20 pictures of her foot. I guess that's a story as well in itself. Even something which is completely random will jog your memory and put you in a particular situation. And maybe there's something interesting there. I think the challenge with finding stories is you don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work. So maybe to come back at you, I always say go where the stories are. You don't know what the stories are going to be until you go there. And you don't know if they're good until you tell them to people. And they probably won't be good until you've told them a few times and refined them. So it's a very inefficient process where you have to find a lot of stuff, try out some of it. Some of it will be good. Most of it will be very bad. And it's up to you to be aware all of the time and try and build up that bank of stories to the point where you can write your best-selling book, 101 Business Stories to Dazzle any audience.
I don't disagree with any of the things you're saying. The photos, yes. I mean, you can definitely jog your memory with things you've taken photos of. I'm just having some fun with the idea that all our photos have any type of meaningful story behind them. When it comes to what people don't know what they're looking for, again, I think the word story gets in the way there. If you say to people, when you're looking for mistakes are the best one, right? Or challenges in your life, okay? Or change. So have you, whatever you know now, what do you know to be important now? When did you learn that? when was the first time you learned that was important, or you learned how to do that thing? Can you think of big mistakes in your life, big challenges in your life? You're probably not exactly the same person after that happened. And so I think that whenever we tell people to look for, like, we should never tell them to look for stories. I think we should always tell them to look for experiences. And the first time something happened, the last time something happened are usually good guidelines. But if I had to tell them one thing, it would always be the mistake that taught you something. Because that is one that, if you can't get a story out of, when you screwed up and learn something from it, then you're just not trying, because that is at its most basic what stories were in the beginning. They were learning tools. It was just a way to relate our experience so other people could learn from it. And I think when people look for something to share, that's not the only thing they're looking for, but a lot of people like to talk about how you should be looking for conflict and change. I often talk about pain and power, but at the end of the day, it's have you learned something? When did you learn it? What was happening before? And probably involves a screw up sometimes. So I think that is the master advice. If you had to, limit it to something pretty narrow for most people, I think.
Yeah. I think it can be even simplified beyond mistakes. It's like, I did this, I learned it. Because it could be good. It could be like, I tried this and it was actually really effective. Maybe it'll work for you as well.
Yes.
And that can be as valuable
as
a mistake.
But you don't need a mistake, but you need some type of struggle. Because I think the learning without the struggle works less well. So you don't need a mistake. You can have just a pain. Something was a pain. It was causing you problems. Then you went and sorted it out. So that can work. But the issue is, someone comes to you and say, I'm really struggling with this thing, Rob. Did that ever happen to you? And you go, oh yeah, it was a nightmare. But then I tried fixing it and I fixed it. That it's relatable, but doesn't qualify you as a guide or as an experience that might be necessarily relevant, because there's no struggle there, right? You have to assume they've tried some things and they're struggling. And if you haven't struggled, you come across as a bit of a dick. Yes, I did. It was so easy. I learned.
It's also not a very good story. Yeah, I mean, you've got to have struggle to have a compelling story. I mean, Lord of the Rings, imagine if like Gandalf gave the ring and Frodo kind of crossed the road, like, just give it in at the local post office and then they'll take care of the rest. It's not a very compelling story at the end of it. So yeah, you're quite right. Storytelling, the struggle in storytelling is essential both for how engaging a story is and for the validity of the lessons that we can draw from it as well.
Since you mentioned the Lord of the Rings, that is the greatest plot hole of all time, which is the whole Eagles thing. How the Eagles that can fly all the way to Mordor to rescue them couldn't just fly them all the way to Mordor to just drop the ring. And if you want to go into an internet rabbit hole, there are whole Reddit threads discussing why this wasn't feasible and why it's not actually a plot hole in the whole Lord of the Rings. Why did they just fly there with the eagles and drop it in the volcano? But yes.
Why couldn't everyone just be friends? And then the whole situation would never happen.
Yes. Okay. Now, if people want to find out more about the stuff that you're doing, I know you're very active on LinkedIn. I'll put a link to your profile there. But is there anywhere else that you want people to go to?
Currently, LinkedIn is the best place to find me. I'm posting most days in the week and always available there. If you want to get in touch with me, a DM through LinkedIn is going to be the best way to do it.
Perfect. All right, man. This has been fun. I hope it was. We had some concerns in the background about what are we going to talk about. I actually realized that I never even got into the whole how you use storytelling as a tourist guide to live off tips when you didn't have a salary. So we left some on the table, which, to be honest, is what almost always happens.
Okay, it was been great fun, Francisco. So thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves, and until next time.